4,000 years ago, I would not have had to tell you this, since if you lived in those times you would have been taught this in school, but 4,000 years of a powerful directed misinformation campaign have taken their toll, and it'll take me some effort here to clarify some basics for you. The Sumerian civilization is the oldest known human civilization on Earth. Their gods were called the Anunnaki, which in Sumerian means those who from heaven to earth came. It blossomed out almost overnight, around 3800 BC, in Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, and came to a sudden end in 2024 BC, when it was laid waste by a deadly radioactive cloud, brought by easterly winds from the Sinai Peninsula, where according to some ancient records, a nuclear war took place. The huge black scar in the face of the Earth, in the southeastern part of the Sinai Peninsula, and the blackened stones that show signs of being instantly melted by extreme intense heat. There is more evidence. Higher than normal levels of radioactivity have been found in the Dead Sea. The site of Sodom and Gomorrah have been nuked at the same time. And in the land of Sumer itself, a recent study has found that around the time of the destruction of Sumer, there was a sudden climate change there, the nature of which is consistent with a nuclear fallout. The Sumerian civilization disappeared around 2000 BC, just as suddenly as it appeared. It is clear that its fall was very tragic, as many Sumerian lamentation texts have been found bewailing the destruction and desolation of various Sumerian cities. All these lamentation texts blame the destruction on the use of some weapons of terror and some great deadly cloud. The detailed descriptions of their effects leave no doubt that the weapons of terror were nuclear weapons. The intercontinental ballistic missiles that dropped nuclear warheads on Sodom and Gomorrah were launched from Africa and belonged to the Anunnaki. The Sumerian-era epic lists 5 cities, along with the spaceport in the Sinai, that were nuked, Sodom and Gomorrah being only 2 of them. The Bible goes into more detail as to what was actually going on. History had it that, following the invasion of the Pleiadians, helped by Abram, the Anunnaki met in their assembly, and decided to nuke the spaceport, so that it did not fall into the hands of the Pleiadians. Armed with proper understanding of who the ancient gods really were, we can now properly address the question of why do we not see them and their advanced technologies among us, and why have we not seen them over the past few centuries? Where did they go? Zecharia Sitchin does not answer, or even address this question, and for the most part ends his Earth Chronicles in 2024 BC. In my research, I have found that all evidence points to the Anunnaki gods being overpowered and forced off the earth by Yahweh of Judeo-Christianity over the period from around 2000 BC to 1000 AD. The trouble started around 2000 BC, when just as the Anunnaki were fighting between themselves over whether Enki's son Marduk would get his wish to take control over the human settlements from the other Anunnaki gods, something very strange was happening to a man of Sumerian descent named Abram. He received directions from some god. Logic suggests that this god was God Yahweh of Judaism, but there is no direct proof of this so far. The first appearance of Yahweh on earth is at the time of Exodus and the creation of the State of Israel in 1433 BC. But regarding the creation of humankind, Yahweh had his version of history that has been taught to people over the past 3,500 years. Enki was the devil. Enki appears in the Bible as Nahash, the serpent, who seduced Adam and Eve. So who was Yahweh? He was a god in the same sense in which the Anunnaki were gods. He was a ruler, a head of state. Of the Pleiadians, he led the human slaves out of Egypt and into the Palestinian land he had picked for his state of Israel. Like the Anunnaki, he He was also a real physical force, not a myth in people's minds. Some thinkers have been puzzled by how could the Jews so easily escape the Pharaoh's troops and defeat all the indigenous people of Canaan, who put up a defense against their invasion, even though the Jews were never particularly good warriors. Along the way to their promised land, they sacked the great city of Jericho. Jericho was the oldest city on earth, built around 8500 BC. Jericho was obviously built by the Anunnaki, not by humans. As the oldest city on Earth and a major Anunnaki fortress, it was a repository of cultural valuables for thousands of years. The Jews laid it waste. But the question is, how did they manage to do it? Jericho was a major Anunnaki outpost and certainly very well fortified. How could a mob armed with weapons no more advanced than axes and spears and arrows overpower a fortified Anunnaki city, with guards armed with laser guns? The Jews themselves, of course, say that their God Yahweh helped them do it. And indeed he did. A close reading of the Bible reveals that as the Jews were marching from Egypt to their promised land, there was a UFO flying overhead. The accounts from the other side of the conflict confirm this. Yahweh was indeed responsible, and it was his ship that overpowered the defenses put up by the indigenous people of Canaan and their Anunnaki leaders. That is how the Judeo-Christian God forced the Anunnaki and their slave human followers out of Palestine. Yahweh wanted to take the control of the whole earth away from the Anunnaki. Over the millennium and a half before the birth of Christ, long and bitter wars were fought between Israel headed by Yahweh and the Anunnaki leaders. After centuries of bitter warfare, the Pleiadians were winning until a nuclear attack by the Anunnaki, mentioned before. The Middle East was lost to the Anunnaki. The Pleiadians had to evacuate to Western Europe. Where did the Anunnaki go? They settled in Eastern Europe. They became the gods of some ancient European people. Rome appears to be yet another culture under the aegis of the Anunnaki. The Roman gods were copied from the Greek ones, and the Greeks were Anunnaki. The head of the Roman pantheon is generally thought of as Jupiter, a parallel of the Greek Zeus, whom I have determined to be the same person as the Hittite Baal and the Semitic Shamash, the commander of space operations of the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki were forced out of the Middle East first, then out of Europe. Their last home on Earth was ancient Russia, and when it was Christianized, the Anunnaki gods had to take off in their rockets and leave the Earth. Many of them probably went back to their home planet, but others may be closer, no farther than the moon. Muslims recognize Allah as the moon god, and there is plenty of moon symbolism in Islam. The Anunnaki controlled the Middle East through Islam. After the Anunnaki left the Middle East, the people living there continued to worship them. Chief among them in certain lands was Allah. The timing only confirms this hypothesis. All this was happening at exactly the same time with Europe and Russia became Christian. Besides the general evidence for an active non-human base on the moon, it is widely rumored in certain circles that the US astronauts received very little welcome from the operators of this base. Simply put, the Yankees were told that they are not welcome on the moon and should go back to where they came from. The moon program was hastily abandoned as a result. I also suspect that the Soviets never went there not because they couldn't, but because they already knew. If the moon base is under Anunnaki command as I suspect, their lack of hospitality to Uncle Sam's ambassadors is quite understandable. The present-day American imperialism, hated by the rest of the world, is almost certainly of Anunnaki origin. When the European thinkers of the Renaissance rediscovered the ancient Egyptian teachings, they associated themselves first and foremost with the Egyptian goddess Isis. Sitchin has shown that Isis was the great-great-granddaughter of Anunnaki leader Enki. Enki led a separate faction of the Anunnaki that I believe was partially Syrian, Anunnaki's mother was apparently from Sirius, the brightest star as seen from Earth. It seems like several attempts were made at recovering the Earth long after it was taken over by the Pleiadians, and all other Anunnaki fled in their spaceships. As it turns out, there is a very well-known city on Earth that still bears her name. That city is Paris. Paris was founded around 300–200 BCE, and its original Latin name is Par-Isis, the city of Isis. In light of this knowledge and of the fact that France was a major center of the Enlightenment, coupled with some other curious facts, for example that Josephine, Napoleon's wife, considered herself almost a reincarnation of Isis, or that the French have copied many Egyptian elements and seriously contemplated building their own stone pyramids, a case can be made for the hypothesis that the Renaissance, which significantly weakened the Catholic Church, was none other than another attempt by the Anunnaki to take this planet back from the Pleiadians. It looks like that attempt was a partial success and partial failure. It wasn't entirely successful, as the French Revolution was not carried all the way to a permanent regime change to bring back ancient Egypt under the Anunnaki. But it was a partial success in that feudalism gave way to capitalism. The internal contradictions of wild capitalism led to revolutionary situations forming in Russia and Germany, but the two countries took drastically different paths. As the hidden war between the Anunnaki and the Pleiadians took a new turn, I believe that the Cold War was actually that very same cosmic war, with the Soviets being on the side of the Anunnaki and the US being on the side of Pleiadians. Stalin's father was a Nyaz. Nyazi were the olden Russian nobility stemming from pre-Tsarist ancient Russia. They probably allied with the Anunnaki to take Russia back.